What does Daggerheart want to be? I heard during the closed beta a lot of things about what Daggerheart was. I heard someone very disparagingly call it a D&D 5e reskin. I heard that it had Blades in the Dark influences, powered by the apocalypse. I even heard City of Mist thrown in there, which it cannot be City of Mist and a D&D 5e reskin. Those are borderline mutually exclusive. So I decided that I needed to find out for myself when the open beta came around. Originally, I was just going to hear about it from my audience, but with all of these conflicting reports, I realized that I needed to see it firsthand. So that's what we did. All right. Collaborative role-playing game. Sure. What is a tabletop? We all know that. What kind of role-playing game is Daggerheart? Let's do that. Heroic narrative-focused experience with combat is a prominent aspect of play, facilitating emotionally engaging player-driven campaigns that are punctuated by exciting battles and harrowing challenges. I like this introduction immediately. So it's narrative-focused, combat is prominent aspect. One of the things I sometimes rag on D&D about is that they present the 3 pillars of play, which are, combat, social, and exploration. And one of those 3 pillars is a bit more prominent than the others. So I like that this seems to be a little bit more maybe self-aware in at least what it's, aiming to be. TTRPGs, 13th Age, Apocalypse Keys, Apocalypse Worlds, Bit D, hello. City of Mist, okay. City of Mist is interesting, because City of Mist is, it's a weird amount of crunch. Like, City of Mist is very rules light, but also oddly crunchy. But it also has amazing character creation. City of Mist is very much not for me, as a system, but the character creation, I think, in City of Mist is, unparalleled. So I love that. I don't think I know. I mean, I recognize a lot of the other ones, but I don't have, hard experience in the rest of them. Earthsea, Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings, Ice and Fire. So we're going... That's kind of... Well, a lot of these are a much softer magic, which is interesting. Like, Ice and Fire, very soft magic. Lord of the Rings, very soft magic. I don't know how soft the magic is in Wheel of Time. It seems soft, but also there's 15 books, so I'm sure that it gets more hard magic later. Never read Wizard of Earthsea or Sabriel, so I'm not sure there. Witcher is very, a little bit softer magic. I mean, it's hard because Witcher's a video game, but also, I would say that it's on the softer side. Let's see. Your character's health and well-being are represented by hit points and stress. Okay. I like that. Just off rip, I think that having an alternate, generalized, mental thing for your character is very good. I think it's one of the difficulties of the exploration pillar in D&D is the fact that basically the only stat that can really be affected as a really negative thing in D&D, especially because D&D is very low riders, right? They don't want to give you -1s, -2s, -3s, especially because of that. The main thing that you can do to a character is damage them in D&D. And so I think that's one of the places where both the exploration and social pillars struggle, is that it's harder to display more mechanical consequences to explicit failures, right? It's very up to the DM. And when I say struggle, I shouldn't necessarily say that. That's maybe the wrong word for it, but put a lot more weight on the DM. Right, there's a lot more weight on the DM to decide what the consequence is of any given action within exploration or social. Whereas in combat, what's the consequence of getting hit in the face with an axe? You lose HP. You know, so I like having an alternate stat of stress to give a DM, even if you don't like mechanicize it super heavily. Like, you could even have it be as ambiguous as it is in D&D with the social and exploration parts, but having this stress, like if you fail an exploration roll and get lost, but then like get back on track, but maybe you're like, you know, a day late or something, that's an easy thing to give stress on. I think that's sort of what exhaustion was going after in 5e, but exhaustion is famously like hard to interact with because it is so extreme so quick. So this seems like I just immediately love that hit points and stress are put on the same level. Gives you a lot of ways to give out of character consequences if you're maybe struggling or you're improving as a DM and you don't know what else to do. You can describe your hit points and stress in any way you like, but they generally represent your character's ability to get knocked down and keep coming back. You'll mark your HP and stress when these situations arise. The fewer marks you have against HP and stress, the better. Fair enough. You don't always have to mark HP. Instead, your class has a certain damage threshold, indicating how much damage you can endure before marking a hit point. So hit points are going to be probably fewer and further between, maybe more like a wound mechanic in like Bit D. Very interesting. Find your class's starting damage threshold at the top of the HP and stress section of your character sheet, and it is different depending on the character class. Very interesting. Okay. Record 3 numbers in the corresponding fields in the damage thresholds in HP. Learn how many hit points to mark on your character sheet when the GM tells you to take damage. Okay. Hope. Hope is a currency that represents the way fate can turn in your character's favor during the game. You'll start with 2 hope at character creation. Mark these in the hope section of your character sheet. Anytime you roll with hope on your duality dice, meaning your hope die rolled higher than your fear die, you will gain additional hope to a max of 5. During the game, you can use your hope to help allies apply your life experiences to challenge and empower your spells and abilities. Okay. So it's okay. It's a common little buff mechanic that could come up whenever, might not come up. Interesting. Okay. If you instead roll with fear, the GM records this in their notes, and they can later spend fear on certain effects. Sometimes a fear roll also introduces other complications into a scene, even if you succeed on your roll. Okay. So there's a lot of... My base is that I like that. My base is that I like that a lot. It is sort of going after... I've talked in Critical Role about how they play a very dramatic style, right? And I think that skill check crits are a way to feed into the intensity of the music for while we read the rules. I know, you gotta have intense music, dude. Also, let me know if it's too loud at any point. But the skill check crits allow them a more swingy, back and forth, dramatic style of game. But even then, I think it's still a bit too random. And actually, one of my main things with it was that it implied success or failure. And that it was a little bit too random. Like, if you're going for, like, a high drama thing, the randomness can be really good, but it can also land on some, like, really awkward segments. Like, it can land on, like, awkward points, and one of the reasons that I don't use skill crits at my table is because it can land on an awkward time where there's no real way to, like, reward or, like, not disincentivize, but, like, there's no way to acknowledge the crit sometimes. Like, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And this seems like it's getting at that concept of, like, rolling with hope. It is still random. It is still basically dice dependent on this resource that you gain. but then you gain that resource to, as a player, heighten the drama of a scene. And again, the way that you gain that resource is still random. It's still, that kind of swingy, drama-dependent type deal. But then you gain control over the drama and the swings. And then on the opposite side, same thing for Roll with Fear. So this is almost like doing the nat 1s and 20s, but disconnecting them from both whether you fail or succeed, right? Because if you roll with fear, but you're getting, an 11 and 12 and you succeed, right? That is still giving the GM that, what would we call it? Aggressive drama, right? Of the fear die, even though you're rolling well. So, like, off rip, pretty cool way to do it. Like, turning these fears and hopes into mechanics, into resources, but you gain the resources based on the random die roll. You'll start with 2 experiences at character creation, one with a +2 and one with a +1, and you'll earn more throughout your adventures. Before choosing, you want to have a solid idea of who your character is. The backstory questions are helpful with this. When you're ready, work with your GM to pick 2 experiences that have shaped your character. There's no set list of experiences to choose from, although some are offered below. Instead, choose a word or phrase that embodies something distinctive about your character. Each experience should be specific. For example, talented, focused, or too broad, as they can be applied to almost any situation. Instead, you might... Oh, this is City of Mist. Okay. Now we're getting into the City of Mist inspiration. Okay. Fair enough. Instead, you might use Swashbuckler or Magic Studies. Additionally, your experience can't give you spells or specific game abilities. For example, Take Flight or One Hit Kill are too mechanically oriented. You might consider Acrobatics or Assassin. So if you are playing Daggerheart and you like the experiences mechanic, this generalized mechanic is basically how you do all of character creation in City of Mist, which allows you to basically build any character to, like, fulfill any class fantasy. I like this implementation of it as, like, a more narrow thing that allows you to have, like, all of these options for mechanics and then still a wild card, so that, like, 2 people that choose the exact same stuff, from the wide permutation of mechanical tree stuff, you can still get to experiences and you can represent your character a little bit more accurately with these experiences. Domain. Domain are the core building blocks of a class in Daggerheart. So we have kind of a modular class situation. All right. They consist of Arcana, Blade, Bone, Codex, Grace, Midnight, Sage, Splendor, Valor. Each domain has a deck of cards that contains a set of abilities and spells with a central theme or focus. For details on what each domain represents and how to use your domain, see the upcoming domain section. Interesting. I'm not hating it so far. It's formed by combining 2 of these domains. For example, the warrior is Blade and Bone, the druid is Sage and Arcana, the rogue is Midnight and Grace. This combination is noted at the top of your character sheet, and the colors and symbols are found in your class foundation chart. To create a new character, look at all the level 1 cards from your class's 2 domains and choose 2 at the beginning. Return the rest to their respective decks. You might take 1 from each domain or choose 2 from a single domain. Ooh! Oh, an Invocation boy is loving this. That I'm loving this when I'm a Warlock main, when I'm wanting boons and subclasses and invocations and feats. That the guy that wants those things is loving this. This sounds awesome. This sounds really, really cool. I'm very down with it. You may take 1 from each domain or choose 2 from a single, whichever you prefer. These cards grant you special spells and abilities. You'll be able to choose another each time you gain a level. I like it. I do like it indeed. Shared domains. Every class shares its domains with at least one other class. Yeah. For example, Blade is shared between Guardian and Warrior, Sage between Druid and Ranger, Grace between Bard and Rogue. If a fellow player's class has the same domain as yours, you're encouraged to coordinate with them and choose different cards from the domain deck. Yeah, totally. This gives everyone a chance to shine with their own special abilities. However, if GM and players agree, feel free to make an exception. That seems totally fair. Create your connections. I like it more and more the more that we read. I'm not saying I'm throwing away D&D tomorrow, but y'all know I like Blades. Y'all know how much I like Blades. And this seems to cut a balance between the two systems. I don't know. We're going to have to see. I will tell you what this is convincing me to do is playtest it. Because I wasn't quite sure. I was like, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Like, I don't have any intention of, like, really ever playing Pathfinder. Because it's just a little too similar to D&D for me to, like, take the time on, essentially. And I was worried. I feel kind of that way about Candela. Of, like, Candela sounds just a little too similar to Blades for me to, like, want to spend a bunch of time on it. This seems different enough from both Blades and D&D for me to want to play test it. To at least see what I think of it, you know? I'm really liking it, yeah. I had a feeling you might vibe with some of this, mostly based on the way Spencer has talked about it in interviews. I'm liking it so far. I'll tell you that. Forge your connections. These represent the relationships and personal history. Oh! Yes! Wait, are these mechanicized or is this like background? Because I would love it if this was mechanicized. Because this is something, you guys know, I've talked about this before. This is something I have straight up done at my tables. At least what it sounds like. I'm not reading the rest yet. But like I'll have like a big bowl, and it's like a player like during session 0 will draw from the bowl, and it'll say like you and one of the other characters got drunk in the past, and each shared a secret. What was yours? And like you form bonds and connections before the game actually starts. I would love it if this was mechanicized. I understand if it's not, but I do like including it in the base rules, regardless. All right, so share all the stuff. Once everyone has shared who they'll be playing, work together to decide how your characters are connected. It is recommended you pick at least one question to ask another PC, but you're welcome to create new questions. Okay, so it's not mechanicized, but it is directly addressed on the character sheet, which I think is good enough for me. I think that's totally good enough. You can always turn down a question or a relationship if it's not a good fit. While it's great to create a connection with every player, it's perfectly okay if you're not sure about some of them yet. You can always discover your relationship through play. Once connections are complete, you're ready to play. Look, I like that it's on the sheet. That it is on the sheet and that they give you questions to ask. I think it would be cool if they were mechanicized, but maybe honestly a bit too much. It might be a bit too... It might put a tiny bit of too much added salt. Too much added crunch onto this if it was mechanicized. A few too many riders to think about. So I understand. But I like that it's on the sheet. I think that's really cool. And not something I've seen anywhere else. Okay. Domains. Okay. Domain cards. Okay, I want to see this. You'll gain increasingly powerful domain cards, which provide abilities and spells you can utilize throughout your adventures. Each domain is composed of 5 elements: level, domain, recall cost, type, and effect. Level and domain. These are located at the top left. When you get a chance to choose new domain cards, you can't choose one with a level higher than your own. Fuck yes. I so badly wish that feats were level gated more in D&D. And I love that invocations are level gated because it means that you can have cool, powerful invocations that are level gated to, 15, 10, 12, whatever. I love that. It instantly absolutely love it. It also means that, like, as you're looking through your deck, you can think about future stuff while also having, your actual choices limited down. And if you get to a higher level, you can always still choose a lower level domain if you want it, like if it works, which is a nice, it's, again, same thing with invocations. I think the reason I love domains is because they're very similar to invocations, and I fucking adore invocations. It's just like, hey, what if the Warlock invocation system was bigger and like segmented based on class? Chef's kiss. I would love that. The top right of the card lists a number next to a lightning bolt symbol. This is the card's recall cost. Once you reach level 5, you'll have more cards than you do space in your loadout. Sort of a spell slot situation, it sounds like. Okay. When you want to move a card from your vault to your loadout, you'll either need to do so during downtime or mark the number of stress indicated to swap it immediately. Oh, so it's kind of going after, like, the prepared casting sort of mechanic. I mean, this is very reminiscent of 4E, from what I understand of 4E. I've never actually looked into D&D 4E a lot, but this sounds a bit reminiscent of like, marshals have powers just like spellcasters, etc., etc. Look, like I said, I've heard that 4E was actually cool if you didn't go into it expecting too much. And I think that these domain cards are going to have a very similar feel of, like, yeah, some of them are spells, some of them are abilities, maybe some of them are sometimes passives. And you can either hot swap them with stress or you can swap them during downtime. I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool. Also, having stress be something you can spend. Not something I was expecting. But, I mean, directly Blades in the Dark-esque. Like, that is exactly how it works in Blades in the Dark, where stress is a mechanic that you spend. So it's interesting. It seems like you will have a lot of resources, but potentially not all that much you can do. Like, it sounds like you'll have, like, a few things you can do. You have, like, your few domain cards. You have, like, your primary and secondary weapon. And then you have your experiences. And that's it. And then you have hope and stress as resources to spend to accomplish those things. The text on the bottom half describes its effects. Sure. When you are targeted by a ranged attack, mark a stress to roll your hope die and increase your evasion against this attack by its value. So I'm wondering, this is an ability that you have. That's how much it... Oh, wait, mark a stress. I fucking totally rolled over it. I was like, what's the cost? What's the cost of this? So stress appears to be a catch-all, like, resource that you can use for a lot of different things. It's very interesting. I think it would also be interesting. This is, again, a way that BitD does it, and maybe what they're taking inspiration from. Stress is a catch-all resource that all of the classes use in Blades in the Dark to, like, perform things or to do things. But it is also sometimes given. So, like, if you fight a ghost, sometimes you get stressed out just by fighting a ghost. So I could very much see it where it is a thing that you can choose to use, but that's a risk because other things can also apply stress. Very BitD of this. A lot of this is very BitD, but there are some very distinct differences that I do think make it very different and novel. So I'm very, very interested in it. Yeah, so swapping the cards happens during downtime. It's a bit more involved and a bit more mechanics heavy than BitD. Little bit more crunchy. So I think it is cutting a nice line between, like, D&D and BitD. Core mechanics, the duality dice. Let's see. represent the way the world pushes back the character or guides them forward throughout the story. Regardless of whether you succeed or fail on an action roll, your duality roll will influence how the scene evolves. Rolling hope and fear. You mark one of the hope has things to do. Critical successes. Whenever you make a duality roll, if both die roll the same number, you automatically roll a critical success, even if you would have otherwise failed because the total is lower than your roll's difficulty. This also counts as a roll with hope, but not only do you gain hope, you also clear a stress. That's a lot. I don't know. I don't love that. I don't love that. Personally. That feels just as random as, crit successes and crit fails. And also there's no crit fails. Yeah, that might be the first thing that I've read that I'm like, oh, that's something I just think I straight up don't like. That's just because am I right about that that's a 1 in 12 chance at that point? Because there are 12 possible rolls where that happens out of, and did I do my math right? Is it out of 144 possible rolls? So that would be 1 in 12. I don't know. Using hope. Help an ally. You can spend 1 hope to help an ally who is making an action where you could feasibly aid them. When you do this, describe how you're helping and roll a d6 advantage die. Sure. They can add the result to their action roll, so I'm assuming disadvantage would be given by, fear sometimes. If more than one PC wants to help an ally, each spends a hope to roll a d6 advantage, and the highest result among those advantage is added to the action roll. Okay. That feels a little bit over. I don't want to say over complicated, but it's like that is kind of one more mechanic to remember. The only thing I'll say about this so far is that there are a lot of disparate sort of mechanics floating around. So I know someone mentioned the resources earlier, and one thing that I've always said about D&D, one of the things that I think is really slick about D&D, and sorry, I got distracted. One of the things about skill checks is in D&D is just the strict D20 system and the straight advantage disadvantage. It's so clean. You never have to think about how many I'm rolling or any weird edge cases. And I think that there are a lot of weird edge cases with this. When you roll your duality, you might roll hope, you might roll with fear, you might get a crit success, which then means that there's hope and you clear a stress, but also you can help, which gives you a extra pool of die, but that pool of die is additive unless you have multiple in which you take the best of them, and that one is additive. Whoa. There's a lot going on. There's which is okay. It seems like this is where they for lack of a better term, this is where they spent their mechanics. I was talking at the beginning about there's going to be mechanical depth somewhere. This is where they spent it. Is how you actually construct the final result of a die and what that result even means. That's where they spent a lot of their mechanical budget, you could say. So on the other end of that, you have something like Blades, where the actual way that you build out your die pool is super fucking simple. But the way that the DM determines the equivalent of DC is much more complicated. There's the position, there's the effect. These positions are effect are based on quality, both of the challenge and of the PC tools. Determining that position and effect for a GM is about the equivalent of trying to determine your fucking dice pool in this. So it's interesting to see where they've put the complexity. It's very interesting. The GM, very simple. Set the DC. The players, on the other hand, think about the D12s, the hopes, the fears, the helpings, the utilizing experiences. That's where they put all of the complexity. Which, once this is second nature, could be very fun. Could be very interesting. You can always mark stress when you take damage that's below your minor threshold. This reflects the impact on your stamina, both physically and psychologically, as you weather blows, fight to stay on your feet, or maneuver treacherous situations. If you ever can't mark a stress slot because your slots are already full, you instead mark 1 HP. Okay, fair enough. In addition to marking stress when you take tiny amounts of damage, the GM can also inflict stress as a complication or consequence of an action. Love it. This is the sort of thing that I feel like exhaustion was intended to be in D&D, and this is, I think, what it needed to be, is this kind of negative consequence other than HP damage. For example, you might mark stress when complications result from having a difficult conversation, clashing words with a worthy foe, or committing an act of incredible bravery. The GM might also give you the option of marking stress to avoid an outcome. Stress from moves. You might be able to mark stress to perform a certain move that calls for it. Okay, I'm going to move on a little bit. Action rules. Let's see. GM and players go back and forth describing what happens. When the GM or your spell, attack, or ability asks you to make an action roll, you'll do so by rolling your 2 duality dice. These 12-sided dice embody the way the world's chance, luck, and fate play a part in the story. Each action roll follows the 4 basic steps, which are detailed later in this section. Pick a character trait. Ask the GM what character trait best applies to the roll, and they will set a difficulty for the roll, either openly or privately at their discretion, based on the details of the scene. So this is a little bit more D&D. So the GM determines the character trait and then also sets the difficulty. That's a little bit more D&D-esque. That'll be a little bit easier of a transition over from D&D. Add extra dice and modifier. Okay, roll the dice, resolve the situation. Okay. Pick a character trait, unless there's more to it. Depending on the situation, the GM might tell you what character trait to use, or your move might require you to roll using a certain... Or it might require you to roll using a certain trait. I see. The GM might ask you for more information to help decide. You want to convince this guard? How are you speaking to them? Are you trying to intimidate them or trick them? I love GM asking questions. I mean, I think that this should just be done more in D&D flat out, and I'm glad that they're working it into the system rules and advice. I think that's a nice thing to do. Sometimes more than one trait makes sense. GM might ask you which trait fits best and give you a choice between the two. Oh my gosh, I have talked about this all the time during Critical Eyes. I love this. It's one of my favorite things to do in D&D is to give them a choice. What up, Coop747? Thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. Yeah, I love this. Like, in general, I actually think I fully prefer the Blades in the Dark style where the player chooses the trait and then the GM just picks essentially the DC based off of the trait that is picked. And as long as like it narratively flows, we're all good. But I think you can keep, most of that by doing exactly what they did here. Of like, okay, the GM asks, it's a little bit of a conversation. Maybe more than one trait makes sense, and they'll give you a choice. I think that's all great. GM sets a difficulty, the number you need to reach when you roll. It's based on the situation and how effective your approach might be. Very, very D&D-esque. I definitely overall, prefer. I prefer the less binary fail or success, but I think that they take care of a lot of that with the fear and hope system. Add extra dice, choosing trait, counting character tokens. We've kind of looked at a lot of this. Okay. Critical success. You get what you want and a little extra. Take a hope and clear a stress. If you make an attack roll, you'll also deal extra damage. Okay. Success with hope, success with fear. You get what you want, but it comes at a cost. Failure with hope, things don't go as planned. You probably don't get what you want and must face the consequences. Take a hope. Or failure with fear. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, this is interesting. It's a lot more... It's interesting because the 2d12 system is going to make whether you succeed or fail more consistent and like more based on resource expenditure, but you will still have this 50-50 swing kind of within the category. So like this, the success or fail, that is going to be, I don't want to say deterministic, but the players will have a lot more control over that. But where they are on each side of this line, that they are going to have a lot, basically no control over. Let's see. Story is consequence. There's no such thing as a role where nothing happens, because the fiction should constantly be evolving. Hell yeah. Which, I mean, this is kind of the essence of, do you need to roll in the first place? So earlier, they gave the example of like climbing up onto the rooftops, and the GM just said, you can just do that. Right? So there is always, I agree, and personally, this is also my D&D mantra, is there should never be a role where nothing happens, unless, like, it's a perception roll. But even then, I like for, if you know, there was... I don't know. It's harder in D&D, and it'll be harder in this, but the thing about this, as opposed to D&D, is D&D does not tell you that a failure means a consequence. This, a failure means that something bad happens. That is like implicit within this system. So if you are trying to perceive something and you fail, something bad happens to you. And that is very much this sort of system, and that is not generally how D&D is necessarily run, because there's a lot more rolling in D&D. So that would be a lot more consequences. And the actual rolling mechanics are a little bit less deep. I personally like this. This is also this like whole like, you know, even a failure should never mean the character simply doesn't get what they want, especially when that would result in a moment of inaction. Every action the players take should yield some active outcome, something that changes the situation they're in. This is how you get away with like having no turns, you know, being like totally turnless, because even if I say fail a perception roll, that progresses the adversaries. That progresses a negative aspect of the scene that I wouldn't progress otherwise, and is maybe not like obviously related to the perception roll, but there's always some sort of consequence, even if it's not necessarily directly related. If you fail a roll to pick a lock on a failure with hope, it might mean you can hear the rumble of footsteps coming down the hall behind you. The enemies you narrowly escaped before getting close, and you're going to have to act quickly to find a way through. On a failure with fear, the door might be magically warded to keep thieves away, causing an arcane alarm to trigger. So this is not just, when we were talking about this earlier, you know, we were kind of saying that, like, hope with fear was just you fail and you get a hope. Which I guess is the thing, right? So it is you fail badly, you fail not so badly, you succeed badly, or you succeed well. So there is a very distinct gradient on how bad things are. Like, this is the absolute worst, this is a little bit better. And it's not just that you get a resource here, it is also that this is supposed to be significantly worse than this. So in terms of the actual, like, how bad things are in the scene for you, it is a very, like, linear line. Interesting. Which, I mean, I think that makes sense within everything else that we've seen. Okay. Oh, yeah, example with action roll. I love that they're giving all of these examples. I think that's really cool. I'm not gonna... I'm curious about the difference here. 10 and 6 plus 2, 18, a success. She immediately gains hope. Then the GM asks her to describe what it looks like as Isabella races across the parapet and interrupts the mage's assault on the party since Sarah rolled a success with hope. The GM asks what the players want to do next. Critical success, 8 and 8. It's a critical success. She immediately gains a hope and clears the stress. The GM offers Sarah a choice of 2 extras. She can deal damage to the mage or gain advantage on the next roll against the mage. Sarah described how Isabella races across the parapet and lands the telling blow on the mage. Wow. So critical successes not only... Oh my gosh. They not only get a hope, they not only clear stress, they not only, it doesn't matter what you actually rolled, if it actually, cleared the DC, it auto succeeds, and you get extra benefits. Yeah, the more I read it and the more that is, implied by it, I think I would like this if we just go tink, tink. I think I like these. I like all of this. I think I would rather this just not exist. I mean, it is certainly a matter of preference and perspective. But this, I mean, and this game is supposed to be, I believe they described it as a, explicitly heroic game. Let's see. Let me see how exactly they described it. Because I do remember that they had a very much like a mission statement. It's a collaborative role-playing game set in a high fantasy world, a place of incredible magic. Heroic. They described it as heroic. They described it as heroic. Which, I mean, this mechanic, this crit mechanic, is certainly incredibly heroic. This is going to make your players just succeed in whatever they want to do much more often and with much higher degrees. And they are going to get this failure with fear much less often. Because it is not only a success with hope, it is a success with hope plus plus. It not only gets you to clear that stress, it also gets you extra effects. Which is definitely, I mean, it is certainly a style. It is a style I really personally don't like. But if you do like it, it's certainly there. NPC reaction rolls. GMs can make a reaction roll when prompted by a PC's ability or spell. When they make a reaction roll for an adversary or other NPC, the GM rolls a d20 to determine whether the target succeeds or fails. If the GM meets or exceeds the target number, the NPC succeeds in the reaction and avoids the consequences. If they roll below the target number, the NPC fails and takes the consequences. This is interesting. Because the NPCs don't have character traits like PCs do, the GM may also add any of the adversary's relevant experiences as a bonus to the creature's reaction roll. If the adversary would be particularly weak against the effect, the GM may impose a penalty. I have to think about that. Like, I have to think about why we are using a d20 and not 2d12. Wait, so it's comparing a d20 to 2d12 plus x? What? That's kind of how I am, Mr. Fizzer. I'm having to think about it. Like, why are we using a d20? Why are we using a d20? Why are we not using 2d12 here? Like, why not just use both for both? Right? It feels sort of odd. I don't know. I'll have to see. Maybe it'll make a little bit more sense in the actual flow of things But it feels like an unnecessary distinction. You know? And also, it says, you know, when prompted, they roll a d20. Oh, whoops. To determine whether they succeed or fail. If GM meets or exceeds the target number, I'm assuming the target number would be stated by the ability or spell. I don't know. It feels like, again, maybe this will make more sense when we're actually in the moment of like playing or GMing this. But I don't see a huge reason to have one side of this be 2d12 and one side of this be a d20. It basically means that like you have to kind of have two separate DC systems. Like you have like the PC DC, which has to be balanced differently because it's going up against 1d20 compared to the 2d12, which will have a totally separate thing. I don't know. I was so ready to dump my d20s into the bin too. Yeah, honestly. Do reaction rolls always d20, PC and NPC? No, PC's reaction roll duality dice, as if it was a reaction. So it is always PCs use 2d12, and NPCs always use 1d20. And it's kind of like why? You know what I'm saying? Because like even the number ranges on these are different. Like PCs are going to have 2 to 24 as possible roll values, with this more being centered towards like a centered roll of, what would it be, 6.5, so 13. They're going to have 2 to 24 with a median of 13, and NPCs have 1 to 20 with a center of 10.5. I mean, maybe this is the intention, and maybe it is just NPCs are going to be bumbling the bag more, and like that is the point. And maybe you determine the DCs like the same, you know, because to me tells me I need to balance my DCs differently. I need to balance my PC DCs separately from how I balance my NPC DCs. But maybe the point is literally that PCs should just always be better and NPCs are always like worse. I mean, not always, but on average. Maybe that's the point. Again, going towards this heroic aspect. I don't know. Honestly, just feels a bit unnecessary at that point. Like, I don't know. Like, you could just say, like, yeah, it's just still 2d12. It's just not using the hope and fear mechanics. I don't know. That's very, very odd. While the players use 2d12 duality as their primary dice, the GM uses a d20. This is because for players who have to follow specific rules for their characters, the stability and the reliability of their dice roll has a large impact on their experience in play. As a GM, this is not vital. You are playing the heel, meaning you are often acting as the bad guys while rooting for the heroes. When you succeed, it creates a new and exciting challenge. When you fail, it is a relief and a boon for the players. The unpredictable nature of the D20's results helps facilitate both of these experiences through a session. This unpredictability can always be mitigated as needed, because you are not beholden to the same rules. If you want to give an adversary plus 10 or minus 10, you have the power to do that. Utilizing this opportunity to ramp up and down the randomness gives you a chance to represent a whole range of adversary types. Okay. So that is what they're going for. I mean, they chose the D20 for GM dice explicitly for the swinginess. That is very explicitly what they're going after. They absolutely want stability. They want stability for players and unpredictability for adversaries. Okay. There's intention behind it, at least. You can't argue with that. This was not randomly chosen. That is a very specific thing to go after that I do think this choice accomplishes. And so to that end, they don't want you to use two different methods of generating DC. Like, you should generate DC the exact same way. It's just that, you know, adversaries are going to be passively worse at it, and they're going to be a lot more swingy. But that is the goal. That is absolutely the goal. I'm never ready to end it. I always, like, say goodbye